First order of business is to remind you about the coming week. Cecile has already emailed you, but I just want to remind you that in order to get in 12 full rounds of the game, we have to double up in 1 week. And this is that week, all right? This coming week. So you will have decisions due on Monday as usual, but then you'll have another round of decisions due on Thursday. And then another round of decisions. These numbers are screwed up here, but that should be 9. And then another round of decisions the following Monday. All right, so next week, decisions due on Monday and Thursday. Don't forget, I'm sure Cecile will remind you again, but just want you to be ready for that. Okay, next, let's see what happened in the game this week. Okay, so here are the current standings. And so big props go to Tiger LLC. Look at that. Started in 8th place. Have risen steadily to the top. Props also to Rack City, who have made a similar climb up to the top. Spice Rack, after doing the same thing, took a bit of a tumble last week, but we'll see what happens there. And Racketeers stepped back up again into the top 3. So among the top 5, we have some back and forth going. And then among the bottom 7, continued mediocrity. So here were the sales versus price figures for this period. We note that prices varied from below 20 and never went above 40. So if we look at periods 1 through 7, once again, the most recent period 7 is the blue circles here. We can see that as time has progressed, prices have continued to fall. No doubt due to an increase in supply. Here's just the sales versus price by team in period 7, last period. Rack and Roll is the team with the lowest prices here, whereas Spice Rack is the team with the highest prices. And as you can see, the lowest demand. There are the assets. Well, it's good to see that everybody's going uphill. That's always a good thing. We see significant separation. How many teams we got here? I guess that's 3 teams, significantly below the other 9. So they have a big problem. Stock prices, interesting. They seem to fluctuate quite a bit. And not a whole lot of spread. Everybody's between 17 and just a little above 21. Here's the industry report. CD's Racks continues to be cash poor with heavy loan obligations. Rack and Roll has the lowest finished goods inventory. Rack City and 30 Rack have the largest finished goods inventory. Current stock prices, again, they vary over not a huge range. 2 companies did manage to lose money last week. Spice Rack, but only a teeny bit below 0. And 30 Rack actually lost 55 cents a share. Still have some decent sized dividends out there, but I think they've gone down a little bit since last period. And one thing I'd be loath to point out, pending insider trades. CDs racks, they're on their 1 period posting. They will be selling all 23,000 shares of their own stock in the coming period. I got to admit, that's a new one for me. Here are the demand numbers. Spice Rack had very little demand last period. Most of the teams had strong demand, varying from, 49,000. I should have green lighted these guys too, up to 10,000 shares. So only Spice Rack had really low demand, which probably had something to do with their price. Which, I mean, they had kind of average finished goods, so who knows what's going on there. Anybody have any questions about the game? Okay. Today's topic is pricing. Today's topic is either my least favorite or second least favorite of the semester. Good news is I won't be going on for very long today because this will be quick. Okay, so I'm not sure how much sense this lecture is going to make. Like I said, it's not my favorite topic, but there's kind of 3 schemes for setting pricing, or for setting prices we can talk about. One is supply demand pricing. It's kind of like estimating what the market will bear. Oops. And setting your price that way. Now you can see you can kind of see the effects of this in the game, right? What has happened to prices in the game over time, and why did that happen? The answer is prices have gone down as supply has gone up. So there's competitive pricing, basically where you set your price based on your competitors and their prices. And then there's manufacturing cost pricing, where you determine you determine price based on what it costs you to produce. So this latter one, first you need to figure out what your costs are. And I would argue that any company should know what their costs are and should be consistently working on reducing their costs. In the game, I guess you can throw all of these costs into the bucket to find out kind of what it costs per product. If costs exceed revenues, you have a problem for obvious reasons, right? I still remember when I started working at Lehigh, believe it or not, the Bethlehem steel plant was still producing steel. And I remember one of my master's students had a job there, and he offered to give me a tour. And so we were looking at the beam yard where they had big stacks of I-beams. And I asked him just off the cuff, I said, what are those worth? And he said, well, it depends. He said, it costs us about $400 a ton to make. And we sell them for $300 a ton. Or it was, my numbers may be off, but that was the gist of it. And I said, that seems to be a problem, doesn't it? And he's like, yeah. You may note that they are no longer in business. So one of the things you're going to have to do, if you haven't done it recently, is compute your manufacturing costs in the homework. So I wanted to point one thing out. in our game data. If you look at our friends 30 rack here, first thing is they lost money.
Professor Stir, we can't see your screen.
Thank you. All right, so here's our industry report. We recall that 30 rack lost money, but we also noticed that 30 rack had robust sales. So I'm not exactly sure what that implies, but that would seem to be a problem of the sort we're talking about. Okay, one problem with manufacturing cost pricing is basically we have both fixed and variable costs, and what we need to do is figure out how much does it cost per unit. So we need to figure out a per unit cost so we can set a price based on that. So the question is, how do you allocate or spread out those fixed costs, like the cost to build a plant, et cetera, over the units that you make? Okay. Assuming that you can figure out some way to do that, once you kind of have a per unit cost, then you can add a return, which is a profit. Now, this kind of pricing where you just kind of figure out your cost and then you bump it up a little bit to arrive at a price will not work in competitive markets. But not all markets are competitive. My first job out of school was for a defense contractor. And that's exactly how every contract they worked on with the government was a so-called cost plus contract. You can imagine how dedicated they were to keeping costs down. That was a sarcastic comment. Okay, competitive pricing, competitive pricing, basically, the thought here is that if you're in a market of essentially identical or very close products, then you can't really afford to have a hugely higher price than your competitors. That being said, it's often the case that you're not in a market where several competitors are selling essentially identical units. In fact, competitors will go out of their way to make their products different somehow, whether it be through better service agreements or better features or higher quality or whatever it may be. So it's rare to have these kind of pure commodity markets, but they do exist. Sometimes this is based on simply knowing what your competitors are charging and setting your price accordingly. Sometimes it's driven, you're almost forced into it. For example, when competitors say that they'll match any price that their competitors give. The business game, it's fairly clear that there is a competitive component to pricing. You can see that in the data, but that's not all there is to it either. And then, so the Econ 1 basic version is supply-demand pricing. So the way this works is that the demand is a function of many influences, including price, but price is probably the main driver of demand. What might those other factors be? Well, there are things like quality, features, branding, scarcity, advertising, convenience, customer service. All of these things may affect demand in addition to price. And for the record, these are things that we call product appeal in the business game. So the way this typically works is that the higher the price, the lower the demand, right? As you reduce your prices, more and more people are willing to purchase your product. Now, the supply-demand curve is not something that remains constant throughout time. Shifts in this curve can occur for all kinds of reasons. Your competitors change their prices, quality advertising, etc. So, for example, if your competitor's price goes down, this might shift the curve to the left. If you have a successful ad campaign, that might shift your curve to the right. This is basically sales versus price. Periods 1 and 7, you can see that the curves have shifted significantly from period 1 to period 7. And then the supply, the price demand curve looks kind of like this. That's not demand, supply, sorry. As the prices rise, more companies, more organizations are willing to supply products to the market, right? That's the idea there. And this can shift too. If a new technology makes production cheaper, the curve might shift this way. Or if you require oil to produce and oil prices rise, then the curve might shift that way. And in the world of economists anyways, you find an equilibrium price where these two curves meet. So again, this is in the Eco 1 world, relies on many assumptions, which may or may not be true, certainly in the business game. So you can use these ideas to, try and figure out what will happen, right? So, if something happens and it causes one of the curves to shift, you can try and find what the new equilibrium price will be. That's the idea here. Okay, like I said, the assumptions are kind of rare or perhaps a little bit unrealistic. It assumes really large markets, no dominant sector. These other influences don't exist. The only thing that matters is price. And that information on pricing is widely available, and all things on sale in this market are identical. Okay, just a little bit more data. So here was the most recent period. You can see that for us, even for a given team and a given price, you do see variations, right? So for example, the blue dot team, the prices are all the same here, but the sales are not the same. These are different markets. I mean, it could be randomness. It could be that they advertise more or have higher product appeal in one market than another. It could be that the total demand in these markets varies based on the prices that the other teams set. It could account for, a lot of things could account for this variation. But generally, you can see what the trend here is, how price affects sales. All right, so just some kind of talking parts. What's new in pricing? One thing that's new in the last decade or so is this idea of revenue management. That's the business school word for it. The way I would describe it is it's tools for extracting as much money as possible from each of your customers. Where you see revenue management most commonly is in products with limited supplies. So you can think things like airline seats, hotel rooms, or seats at a theater or a stadium. But I've also seen revenue management at gas stations, for example. So if we look at how airlines do this, they start with the idea that different customers are willing to pay different amounts. For example, if you're a business traveler, you're on an expense account, you may not be as sensitive to prices, somebody paying out of their own pockets. So what the airlines will try and do is create fare classes. Now, you can't ask somebody if they're traveling on business or not, but you can do things like you can determine if they have a Saturday night stay. In other words, if they fly out before Saturday and return, I'm sorry, if they fly out before Saturday and return, I said that backwards again. If they fly out before Saturday night and then they return after Saturday night, then there's a higher likelihood that they may be, you know, on some kind of a vacation or paying their own fare. And so in revenue management, we use statistics and optimization to try and set up these different fare classes, determine the price, and then allocate the number of seats to each fare class. And then once we've done that over time, we observe how well the different seats and the different fare classes are selling, and we may adjust the allocations over time. But again, the idea is to sell all of our seats while at the same time extracting as much money from our customers as possible. Example I saw with gas stations is there are some gas stations that literally change the price of gasoline several times a day. So if you can imagine a gas station near a busy highway with lots of commuters, what this gas station might do is during the commuter time, in the morning and the afternoon, they will jack their prices up. Then in between, they'll lower their prices down when it's more local traffic who have more time on their hands and more local knowledge that would enable them to be more price sensitive. Another example, this is kind of, this is from game theory, kind of, is these things called Vickrey auctions. So there are lots of cases where buyers will submit sealed bids for a single item. And the way a Vickrey auction works is that whoever submits the highest bid wins. But the amount that they pay is equal to the amount of the second highest bid. Right? So you actually end up paying less than you bid, and you pay the amount that the second highest bidder bid. And this is interesting because, at least according to game theory and the economic definitions of rationality, if you conduct an auction this way, it will assure that each bidder bids his or her true valuation of the product, which is all you can ask in an auction. So one question is, how sensitive is total demand to price? So I kind of took the data. I didn't take this data. I took data from all 7 periods, and I took averages within markets, right? So each dot here represents the average price and the average demand in a market summed up over all of the different teams, right? So this is the average over the teams of demand and price during one of the periods in one of the cities. And this is for all the cities. And you can see that there's a clear effect, a clear relationship between average price and average demand. So that's probably useful information. All right, as you can see, I don't have that much to say about price. But it is a big deal in the game, right? So the homework is going to consist of, well, there's one kind of weird problem, but most of the problems have to do with the game. Trying to look at some data in the game, figure out what your costs are and how to set prices and things like that. Plus one weird game theory Nash equilibrium problem. That's it, man. I'm done. Wow, finished in record time. Any questions? Yeah, I thought you'd at least look happy that I finished in record time. Nice fake smile, Sam.